Welcome back to Pop Politics. I'm Damien Lewarden.
I'm Rebecca Hills-Judy.
And I'm Mitchell Ackhurst.
Together we are Third Take Media, and today we are going to be looking at the question of, are video games a bit too much like work? Rebecca, you were the one who put the topic forward for discussion today, so I thought I'd throw it over to you to sort of define the ideas that we're going to be discussing. So what do you mean when you say, is it more like work than entertainment?
There's this thing that's been happening, and it's particularly a problem with the so-called live service games, where you feel like you have to log in every day, and there are like these list of tasks that you have to do every day in order to achieve a reward which is fairly distant in the future. And sometimes they're quite boring things. For an example, the reason why I stopped playing the retail version of World of Warcraft is because reputation was capped per day. So, in order to kind of keep up with everybody else, you had to do up to that cap every day. And if you missed a day, you couldn't catch up because, you could only do that day. So if you missed a few days for whatever reason, if you'd gone on a holiday, if you were sick, whatever, tough because you've missed those days and you've missed out on progress towards the rewards. And it occurred to me, it's like, if you take a couple of days off from work, then you know what it's like. Your inbox is full and you have all this stuff you have to catch up on. And it's like, this is not fun. This is like when I go on holiday for a few days and come back and my inbox is overflowing. And these rewards are so distant that it's not worth the amount of effort I'm putting in. Tiny little reward. Lots and lots and lots of days of effort. And mobile games do this as well. Login daily bonus. It's like, keep you chained to it in the same way that work tries to keep you chained to your desk all the time.
I guess I'm a little bit lucky in that I don't play a whole lot of those sort of games as a service games. Like, I don't keep up with that sort of side of the industry. I don't do MMOs in general, so I'm lucky enough to have sort of avoided that whole aspect, but I will come back to that because I think there's still ties to the kinds of games that I play, but I want to throw it over to you, Mitchell, to add just a response to that idea.
Well, that's a good point. That it's that we're talking about an industry that is really just a whole bunch of industries, and one of them is games as a service. And I think we've gotten so used to talking about games as a service that we've kind of forgotten that it's not really ever meant as a service to a player in the way that we think of, something nice like you're being served dinner or something. We often talk about games that are directly descended from when Destiny hit big at the start of the PS4 and Xbox One generation. And before then, all of these problems that you're describing, Rebecca, like problems like daily login bonuses and things, were mostly the domain of free-to-play mobile games and MMOs. And I think we can talk about those all in one basket because they all seem to have this same attitude of needing you to stick around in a way that is sort of like the next step. I mean, we talked about sitting through long episodes of television last week or the week before, and how sometimes waiting on a plot point in a long, mediocre TV series can feel a little hostile. If you're waiting on the 30-day login bonus for this month by having to open up the game every day and do an arbitrary number of things to get that login bonus or whatever, like that's the next step in this horrible you're being chained to your entertainment sort of experience. And I think the reason that Rebecca and I were really talking about it was because these things are becoming more prevalent in all sorts of AAA games. It's a problem that I've had with MMOs for a while. The only MMO I don't seem to have this problem with is Final Fantasy XIV, but I'll get back to that in a second because I have something else to say about that. But I'm concerned seeing it pop up in more games, and I think a perfect example of this creation of chains, of ways of keeping you locked into the game that aren't simply you want to play the game to have fun. I think that this concept ties into the game you've been playing because it's a mechanical thing and it can come in many different forms. The forms that I find to be the most anxiety inducing are quests. Like make sure that you do this, this, and this, and make sure that you can get that quest every single day that you log in, so that you've logged in enough days in a month to get to the item that you really want or something. But it doesn't have to just be quests. It can be any way you interact with the game. And you've been playing God of War.
Yeah, I have. And it's not necessarily like that in God of War. It's more just like sort of arbitrary numbers and like level gating through this arbitrary number system because there are times when you're under-leveled and you're facing a high-level enemy and their attacks are unblockable and will knock you out in one hit. But then when you level up to match them, suddenly they can be parried, and it just feels very artificial. But I did actually want to touch on something that you were both discussing because Game Pass, what you're saying about the daily login rewards and how that keeps you engaged with the service, Game Pass has Game Pass rewards as well. And that's tied into like
Oh
Microsoft
boy.
and Bing rewards, which are all like log in, do some arbitrary quests, and then you'll get points, and then maybe you can earn enough points to get Game Pass free for the next month. And like I love that concept because there's actually like a tangible real world benefit in that I don't have to spend a bit more money. But I think it goes back to that same thing of just trying to keep you engaged in that same whole system, and I find it really problematic.
I wonder how much of this can be traced back to things like store reward cards and things like that. And because
Steam does cards
Mm.
where like you collect them or something. I don't engage.
yeah,
I'm sorry, I don't know much about it.
There's a weird market for those where they're like because you
Mhm.
can convert them into gems and then you can sell those or something. And some
Ugh.
games actually like even like really awful games are actually worth money because they give you these cards which can then be converted into gems which can then be sold for real money. And I'm like, this sounds like money laundering.
Mhm.
And it feels really sketchy. Don't like
And
it.
I also don't want to steamroll over your point earlier. I thought of Steam immediately when you said store cards, but you also meant like loyalty programs and
Yeah.
That was where my mind
gift
went.
cards, even that sort of thing. And
Things like over here we've got the Nectar card, which is kind of attached to a lot of credit cards and debit cards and things. And you go to certain supermarkets and buy things, and that earns you Nectar points. But you nearly always need a terrifyingly enormous number of Nectar points in order to get anything that's actually worth anything. I'll tell you what it reminds me of. You know when you go to like the arcades and there's those ticket machines?
Mm.
And you
Yep.
like you have to earn thousands of these tickets to get one of these prizes. And the amount you spend trying to get these tickets is more than you would actually just like pay in a store for one of these prizes. And it feels a bit like that, you're and then there's the stuff that's starting to kind of be talked about in AAA gaming spaces of the idea of play to earn.
Mhm.
And again, this feels sketchy as hell.
I think the thing maybe we didn't actually set up our conversation, but this is all under this umbrella of capitalism, and every example that we've brought up is all part of systems of like you said, actually, Rebecca, where we're almost putting in more of some other kind of value, whether that's time or money, than we're actually getting out of it in terms of fun, which is pretty anti-game. And Damien, I enjoy the new God of War quite a bit because I like the story and the characters, but I never once thought that I was having fun engaging with the number system it uses, because I think, if I recall correctly, it even has a light number, like in Destiny. There's a number that's like an average of the numbers that are attached to all of your equipment, and that number just has to be above a certain amount for you to enter the next area or to defeat the boss or whatever. And it's
like eye levels in WoW. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like,
I hate that as well.
Right. I don't think. I mean, okay, I shouldn't say this. I'm sure there are people who love that sort of thing because numbers can be exciting, but we've come from a world over the past 30 years where, especially for action adventure games and RPGs, it was the inherent entertainment of these worlds and characters and storylines we wanted to interact with. We didn't need extra layers of numbers to make you feel like you're putting more effort in or something. We didn't need those because we were enjoying ourselves anyway. And now we're describing a situation where something we'd like to enjoy, whether it's World of Warcraft or God of War, is putting these layers of obfuscation of numbers that we have to sort of force our way through.
Yeah.
It's like in World of Warcraft Classic or Vanilla or whatever you want to call it, if you went the wrong way out of Undercity, which is one of the major hub cities, and you go there at fairly low level, and you have like a stick and like crap leather armor, if you go the wrong way out of Undercity, you'll go into a really high level area and get instantly murdered. But there's nothing to stop you doing that. Let me, with my stick and my crap armor, go into the high level area and get murdered if I want.
Yeah,
Don't
absolutely.
put these don't wrap me in cotton wool and decide for me. Because then you can get glorious things like a level 1 character going through and like, yes, I'll go through this area and not be murdered. Ha 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 ha. Because self-imposed challenge thing.
I don't think I invented this myself. I'm sure I heard it from someone, but it's like there's a sign out the front of the level with like the height differences at the front of a roller coaster, and it's like, you must have faffed around this much before you can come into this level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes that faffing around can be quite predatory if we're talking free-to-play MMOs. I don't even need to go into gacha games and how they monetize their systems, but
when they do that sort of thing, and then the next stage is that they say, oh well, you can skip the faffing around if you pay us $20. And we will automatically skip you up to faff level 15.
And they're implicitly telling you that the stuff you must do between level 1 and level 50 must be that interesting if you can just pay money to skip it.
It's like, why am I paying money to not play your game?
There's a part of me that wonders if that whole system is somehow connected with old school Metroidvania style of design, where it's like, oh, you need to go and find this item to unlock this area, except now they're not doing that. It's more like you need to just have spent your time in this game to unlock this area. And I mean, like, it's a huge shift in design, but I think it's fundamentally the same idea in some way.
World of Warcraft players get really, really annoyed by the idea of time gating.
And understandably, it's
like, it doesn't matter how much stuff you do, that area over there is still out of limits until it's week 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever it is.
And we're back to sounding like work. It sounds like work, you got to do your training, and then you got to do this thing every single day, and
you've got to pass,
eventually we'll give you a gold star.
Pass your 3-month probation and do this training like you said, Mitch, and then maybe we'll think about possibly letting you into the staff room. It doesn't feel like a reward at that stage.
Mm.
It feels like, oh, well, now you've got more work to do. Isn't that great? I thought I
And
bought
so
this
much
game
of
to
it,
play
like
fun.
they don't even tie it to story. I would be less fussed about this kind of gating thing if there was story attached to it as opposed to just more faff to do.
Mm.
Can I have some more story? Can I learn more about these characters? No, I just have more pointless busy work to do.
Yeah, I find that a real problem in open world games in particular. Um, in like things like Skyrim, there's so much to do, but there's so little that actually feels like it's valuing my time.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
and
think there is an interesting crossover there between what we find to be part of a changing hostile mindset that's driven by money. You must waste this much time in our game or pay to get ahead, all those sorts of things. Or, take any of the recent Assassin's Creeds or to a superlative extent, Breath of the Wild, where the faffing is kind of the point. And that's a legitimate experience, but I think it requires very careful design. Not every game that presents like Breath of the Wild is worth putting 100 hours into.
I've reviewed a game called Vane.
that was the VR one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. Aesthetically, it had a lot in common with games like Journey. Really kind of interesting start that gives you kind of hints of story. And this vast open world with nothing in it. So I'd spend ages, is like, right, what's over there? And like fly to the far corners of the map, expecting to find something. A piece of lore, some ancient parchment with somebody's story on it. Nope. Nothing. It's the reason why I really liked Assassin's Creed Origins, is because, there's all of this stuff on the map. Not all of it's tied to the kind of Assassin's Creed meta plot. Some of it's just about ancient Egypt. I happen to find that fascinating. So, I did climb up the pyramid and into the ancient ruins and apologise to the gods whose faces I was climbing over. Like, I'm sorry, Sekhmet! Really sorry! Please do not smite me! Because I found it legitimately interesting, and there's all this kind of interesting bits of lore and history and stuff in there. A lot of games forget to put it in.
We'll pause there, take a bit of a break, reset. What are what are we vibing this week? So what are we playing? What are we reading? What are we watching that's got us excited?
This is Amy's fault. If she's listening, this is your fault. I've been playing Path of Exile. I played a lot of Diablo 2 and 3. I played hardcore back in the olden days of Diablo 2. But I kind of I've done everything in Diablo 2 and 3. I haven't bought Remastered yet. I probably should at some point. So I was like, I feel like playing Diablo, but I have literally done all of the things. So I started playing Path of Exile. And the first time I tried it, I kind of bounced off it because it's so complicated. But Amy gave me some tips, so I've started again. And the one thing I really like about Path of Exile is how it handles the trading system. Because money doesn't exist. So instead, it's the crafting items and the identification scrolls and things like that, which are used for trade.
That's pretty
And
clever.
I thought that was really clever, because one of the problems that you have in Diablo 2 and 3 is that the inflation becomes ridiculous because gold by about Act 3 becomes utterly worthless because you have 600 million tons of it.
And I think that's the thing with a lot of games as well. It goes back to what we were saying about capitalism just before. It's sort of that whole process of the numbers just need to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, inflation is good in games.
Yeah. Path of Exile isn't one that I've played, but I know that I should.
Especially since you're from that side of the world as well, and they're kind of based there.
Yeah.
I had a good laugh when I came across the plummeting Ursa. Did you put a drop bear in the game? Yes, you did. Right, okay, cool. Good, carrying on.
So It sounds like that this is an example of a free-to-play game that is not feeling like work, and it sounds like because it's Diablo or enough
Yes.
like Diablo, which is a great example of a game that's always fun.
Yep. Murder lots of things, take their stuff. It's very cathartic.
Over to you, Mitch.
Oh well, I recently decided to finish watching Stargate Universe. It ties a little into our discussion over the past couple weeks about how much time you invest into your entertainment, because when it first came along, its first season had some significant troubles. The first storyline is a 3 episode long story, and then the very next storyline is a 2 part episode, and that continues through most of the season because it was a network television series, so you could only go up to 44 minutes, and the scripts they were writing kept getting too long.
Uh,
It got to the point where there are episodes that were planned for season 1 that ended up in season 2, because I think it's something like half of season 1 ended up being multiple episodes spun out of a single episode because the script was too long, and that results from a cast that was very large. It was a lot more of an expensive TV series than SG-1 or Atlantis, and it was so unwieldy for that first season. People, when it released, were comparing it to Lost and Battlestar Galactica negatively because it couldn't quite match up to those for people. And by the time it got very good in season 2, the show wasn't a success and it got cancelled. But I like seeing these kinds of shows for exactly that reason, because there's always an interesting narrative behind the show, whether it's how the scripts came about or the point in time it released. In 2009, people were hungry for that sort of space show, but it is formally perhaps a bit of a try-hard. Every single shot is very shaky cam. Everybody talks like this because everything is very serious and there's not very much humor at all. And you've got sex scenes every second episode, even though it's network television, so it's edgy. And by the end of season 2, it's a 13-year-old series. By the end of season 2, I was also wishing that it hadn't been cancelled.
I didn't hate it. It's just it had so many shortcomings compared to SG-1.
Yep. I mean,
in terms of how choppy the writing was in that first
yeah.
season.
And
It was so like we start something and then we stop and do something else for a bit, and then we start something else and do something else for a bit. It's like, make up your mind.
Yeah, it you can't say it wasn't ambitious. It was very expensive. It had a huge cast of
It
pretty
looked beautiful.
leading artists, leading actors. But like a lot of other shows in that vein, you end up being a bit spread too thin, like butter over too much bread. Damien?
Me? So we've spoken about God of War, and I'm going to be speaking about it a bit more, maybe, if we ever get there. I've also been reading Bones and Runes, but I'm reviewing that for Ori Ellis, so I'm not going to say too much about that. It's a book by a South African writer named Stephen Embleton, and I've also been watching the second season of the recent French-British production of War of the Worlds, which, if you're looking for a faithful adaptation of H.G. Wells' work, you're not going to find it. It's
Dang it.
it's a very modern sort of update. It's an interesting show in its own right, I think, but
I'm sorry, but War of the Worlds, my brain instantly goes dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun.
Ooh la. Because my dad was a prog rock fan, so this is what I got exposed to from an extremely young age.
Him and me both. Jeff Wayne's musical War of the Worlds is maybe my second favorite CD ever.
I'm just sitting here like, whoosh. What are you guys talking about?
We should do Never Seen on that, or Never Played.
Yes.
On
I'll
War of the
expose
Worlds.
you to Jeff Wayne's War of the World.
Sounds like a plan at some
So
point.
the first thing you need to understand about that is that it was made in the 70s. It is quite 70s.
I was going to say that pretty much says it all, doesn't it?
It goes a bit prog and a bit disco, and yeah. What is genre? We throw it out the window. Let's just have fun.
That's always fun, though. So yeah, that's us all caught up with each other. So let's finish off the conversation with getting back to the original topic about AAA video games more about work or entertainment, with a very simple, very sort of fundamental question. Are we still feeling entertained by these games we're talking about?
I think we've reached the point where, like with blockbuster movies, if you like the aesthetic trappings, then you're more likely to be able to sit through the boring parts. I think Horizon Zero Dawn is right on the edge there, now that it's been updated to 60 frames per second. I don't think I could handle the motion blur. It messed with my brain. But now that it's got to 60 frames per second, I can play it at least. And it's only just interesting enough that I'm willing to sit through all of that open world slog. And that's just for me, like open world games are what is a success right now. And there are other people, I'm sure, who aren't interested enough in sci-fi, and so they're not bothered at all. And there are other people who absolutely love the universe of Horizon Zero Dawn, and I don't think boredom or like the capitalist need to fill the game with as much busy work as possible so you spend enough dozens of hours on it. I don't think those things matter to some people if they just love what they're experiencing.
I think we're going to get to a tipping point where enough people stop that there's going to be a backlash against it, and you're going to kind of revert back to a more simplistic.
I would love that for one.
You're already seeing it a bit in the indie game scene. Because one of the problems you have with these is that you have to invest so much time. And people are time poor. You can only really have one of these very involved live service games which demand that you log in every day, which demand a certain amount of time per day. It's like, World of Warcraft back in the day, that was the one MMO to rule them all, because you could only really have one unless you had a lot of copious amounts of free time. And people don't. So capitalism simultaneously demands that we are productive and spend most of our lives making money for rich people. Sorry, I'm being a bit socialist now.
Oh, it's totally fine. I think we're all socialists here.
I am from the People's Republic of South Yorkshire. It's in my blood. And yet, when we get home, they then demand our time in our entertainment and say, you have to dedicate this much time to your entertainment. And there are signs that people are getting sick of it. And kind of there is this kind of slowly gathering backlash against this idea. You see it in the way that the numbers for World of Warcraft retail right down. And you see it in the reaction to ideas such as NFTs in games, which is clearly another means of kind of sucking money and out of people. So I think there's going to be, at some point, this is not going to be profitable anymore. So you're going to see a reversion back to more simplistic mechanics and more simplistic worlds.
What you mentioned there about time poor was something that's actually really interesting to me, because I think you mentioned it in the chat the other day, Mitchell, where you were talking about sort of that conflict between how games, they are these big sprawling things that demand you log in every single day to do whatever it is, whatever faffing about it is, but at the same time they're trying to appeal to a much broader audience. So it's like,
Right.
but so many people are time poor that, like, how can they appeal to that bigger audience of people who don't have the time to invest in their game?
I'm glad you brought that up again, because that's sort of why I put a pin in Final Fantasy XIV, actually. But it's sort of to begin broadly and narrow focus a bit. If you're aiming for a broader and broader audience because your game is so expensive you need to sell more copies, then you're running out of excuses not to make it more accessible. And for some people, accessibility means not badgering them with things that are going to put into fatigue parlance, use up all their spoons. Because sometimes people who may not have every physical or mental opportunity that we take for granted also enjoy playing games, and you don't want to create a game that is designed hostilely, in the way that hostile architecture is like, oh, we put spikes on this wall so that you don't lean against it, sort of a thing. If you're trying to sell to a broader and broader audience, then sort of the opposite of your sort of capitalist thinking should in fact be the case. You should be thinking about how can you make the game easier for people to enjoy. So, like, I'm not going to harp on Horizon because people love Horizon, and I'm an outlier in having trouble with how dense that game is. I think just because I'm dumb. But there are games that go much further, and will have this also touches on MMOs, both paid and free to play. They will have UIs just covered in text, and that's not exactly a great idea because people don't all process text when they're playing a video game the same way, and you're cutting out a huge swath of your potential audience if you're bombarding them with text in the UI. Now, Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO in the sense that it's a bit messy. You need so much information that it does tend to throw lots of windows of information at you. It's got lots and lots of quests you have to complete and all of that. So it's definitely, in that sense, not for everyone. But one little thing it does that I have been annoyed with games for most of my life is it does not shame you out of quests. And what I mean by that is a lot of games will use negative reinforcement to get you to complete a quest. And by that, I guess I mean just you walk up to somebody and they say, hey, could you help me with the giant slugs in my giant cabbage patch? And you get a yes or no. And no usually means I'm not in the mood to do this quest, I want to do it later. And if you say no, the quest giver will say something like, well, I suppose you have something better to do. Because the point of that quest is to get you to do it. Final Fantasy XIV, it does give you all of these quests across this entire universe of gameplay, but when you say no to a quest, the characters don't shame you for saying no, which I think is kind of important because in a lot of what you say, exploitative video games, they will press your emotional buttons with that negative reinforcement to be like, well, if you don't complete this quest within the next 24 hours, this planet will get raided again and there'll be, 50% casualties or something horrible. And that's part of this system of getting you to play as much as possible, potentially pay, depending on what the game wants you to need. And the fact that Final Fantasy XIV doesn't do that you can basically just do whatever you like, whenever you like, I think is pretty neat.
It's an outgrowth, I think, of developers and publishers looking not at how much fun people are having and how much people are talking about, like, the characters and the lore and stuff, and it's purely a case of how many hours do they spend in the game.
Yeah.
How much
Which is
money have they
problematic.
spent on microtransactions?
Yeah, comes back to a whole metric-driven design.
Yeah.
Rather than using like intrinsic motivation, it kind of forces that extrinsic motivation.
Which is why you have all this kind of nudge theory marketing nonsense showing up. I think it's detrimental to game design and the enjoyment of it, because games are supposed to be an escape from reality. You don't want to kind of leave your hideous little grey cubicle and come back home and go into a virtual hideous grey cubicle.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I think that what you said also applies in the reverse, in that when I describe the experience of playing Final Fantasy XIV and not feeling pressured to complete quests, that's one kind of the game experience. Once upon a time, there was a game called Thief or Deus Ex or any immersive sim, if you like. And in those games, there may be a time limit on completing a quest, and that's all part of the experience of those games as well. And the mindset of monetizing these experiences means that we start to think that other kinds of manipulation that are just tools of game design, like creating intentionally player hostile quests, like you have 12 minutes to complete this quest, and if you don't, this person's going to die. Parts of games that people have loved because they're tense, they're actively assaulting you with an idea, or they're very difficult for some reason or another. They can be monetized. They can, instead of being part of a package of what the game is trying to do, it can be like, as you said at the very start, if you don't finish this quest in 12 hours, it's gone, and you won't win. You'll have to do the next one, which will be something else.
And then you'll be behind by 24 hours, everybody else, and it's that have and have-nots thing, which is actively encouraged, I think, by developers, because it's that FOMO thing, that fear of missing out. This item is only available for 24 hours. Pay $5.99 now to get it, or it's gone forever. Doing that to games just feels so scummy, because it's not gone. It's a digital item. You can bring it back whenever you like.
If they put up episodes of the latest Star Wars television show, but they removed the previous episode, if you didn't get a chance to see it, people would riot.
There'd be a riot, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just look at the response when Discovery was taken off, whatever it was, Amazon Prime or whatever it was, and there's everybody outside of the US who didn't have CBS Access or whatever it's called.
Yep.
So you can't have it until CBS Access is available in your region, and that's not for 6 months or whatever it was.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, we spent something like half a year expecting for the next season to come out until it was like 2 weeks before it happened that they said, no, actually, we're taking it away.
Yeah, and they were taking all of the other seasons that were available as well. And even the cast and a lot of the crew were like, what? You can't do that. That's ridiculous. Well, and they kind of reversed course because the backlash was so intense.
I mean, that sounds like a little bit of a different issue, because it's more like the sort of like licensing rights and that side of things.
But we can talk about media preservation some other time, because I have opinions.
That's a good topic.
It really is. But we'll put a pin in this one for now. But to finish off, we're kind of being a bit downbeat about the whole thing, and I just want to say, you know what? Fuck it, I'm still having fun. It's like God of War may be a very numbers-driven sort of game, but I still enjoy it. I'm still having fun, like killing Draugr, and it's still fun.
It'd be slightly better if it had feathers and eyeballs.
Yeah.
Like the old games.
Yeah, but it's fine. I'm okay with it.
Well, it does have feathers and eyeballs. It just also has numbers.
Yeah. Yes. So, any final thoughts on anything?
Yeah, I think this is going to change. I think there's going to be a changing of opinion on this. Because it kind of has reached saturation point, I think, now. And you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again without diminishing returns. So when the money changes, the designs will change.
Yeah, I think I saw something the other day that was like the 3 big new multiplayer releases of last year, all of them significantly underperformed. I don't know. I can't remember what they were, or like can't verify it, but it's just something I saw. So I don't know. But I think you're probably onto something. I think we are seeing a bit of a sea change in the whole situation, and hopefully it's for the better. Yeah, so with that, thank both of you for joining me. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.